It's open mic time. That's how we've envisioned that this would work. It's how it may not work as well. We have, like I think I said earlier tonight, some great planning commissioners in Spanish Fork. One of them will, I'd hope, give me a little bit of, maybe a little bit of credit, or maybe I can dig out of kind of a hole I'm in, if by chance we get out of here before 9 o'clock even. So we want the discussion to be as robust as yes, Todd, that's you. As robust as you guys want it to be, but really this is intended to be your time to talk about whatever you want. Now again, we have the dream team here with Ted and Wilf. I've got some ideas as to things we could use as starter topics if anybody wants. But honestly, anything anybody wants to chat about? Anybody willing to go? Please. You guys want to hang on this? I think I can picture it.
Many years ago, I went to a seminar. By the way, I'm a CPA. That has nothing to do with planning, but this was a seminar for CPAs, and they did and by the way, there is a question here. But I need to give you some background. Anyway, we went to this seminar, and they said, we're going to have you do a test on how much you know about desert survival. And we thought, what's that got to do with being a CPA? And what they did was they had us all do this test as individuals, and then they had us get together in groups, and there were a number of things that they suggested when we got into the groups about how that group should function, and I'll mention a couple of those and see if you think that's a good idea. But they said, anyway, the interesting thing is every person who did it individually got a lower score. Every person in the group got a lower score than the group. So the concept, of course, was that a group can make a better decision than an individual, obviously. And even some of the people in the group said they were desert survival experts. You know, one of the guys had been in the military and over Iraq, and he knew more about desert survival than the rest of us and everything. Well, anyway, the interesting thing is they said, okay, when you have this group do the work, number one, you need to select an individual to be, let's say, the chairman of the planning commission, who is not the desert survival expert. And you also need to select that person as being one who is not the most dominant person on the planning commission. I'm making analogies here. And the reason for that is that a person who says he's a greater expert will sway the rest of the group into making some wrong decisions. And the other reason that they said don't select the most dominant person is obvious there as well. And I think sometimes it's the judges in trials, such as the 12 Angry Men, select somebody who's not the most dominant person, but select somebody who's the person that's going to get along best with everyone, and try to draw out from their ideas so that they can make the best decision. And so, I know we had one man on our commission who was a professor at Brigham Young University in planning, and I thought, I'm a CPA. I don't know anything about planning a community. I can do your tax returns, but anyway, I thought, so every time he would say, this is the way, this is what I think, I was thinking, well, I probably should think that way. I caught myself doing that. Then I got thinking about that test on that desert survival, and realized that's really the wrong thing to do. And so I guess what I'm saying is, what I'm asking now is it a good idea not to select the strongest person on the commission as the chairperson, or to perhaps even have a person on the commission who is a planner, maybe, you know, a professional planner.
Great question. Can I add to that? Just maybe, how typically do people get appointed to be the chair of a planning commission? There's some trends that I've seen over the years, but maybe that's what we're talking about. And incidentally, I don't mean to hover, but I have a microphone, so that's why I'm going to try to be nearby anybody that has a question. But
well, and forgive me, Wilf knows law way better than I do, but this is, how many of you, it's the case that the chair cannot make the motion?
But that's just Robert's rules.
Yeah. So I think it, what?
I think it's like Robert's rules.
Yeah. So I had pressure to become the chair right off the bat because people knew that I know a lot about planning. And I chose not to be the chair for a while, and I think it was, in a lot of ways, it was better for precisely the reason that you talked about. And, you know, I'm going to actually try to leave the commission here in a few months, and I think my recommendation is going to be the person that can help draw out opinions. You know, I think the dominating person, whether it's an expert or not an expert, it doesn't matter. I think that having one dominant person, I think, is bad. I will even go so far to say I think it's actually worse to have the one dominant person not know anything about planning. I think that expertise has some value, but anyway, what do you think?
How's your chair selected?
We do it as a vote of the commission members. Yes. How many do that? Your chair is selected as a vote of the other commission members. How many do another thing, or who does another thing that you want to share? How the chair is selected?
whether it's by seniority or not, how often does that factor in? Is that ever for you guys? At least in the past, oftentimes that's been the case for us. I can't remember if it's that way now or not, but yeah.
I've seen it.
Is it because somebody doesn't show up for a meeting and they become the chair that night? Right?
I've seen it done a lot of different ways. Most planning commissions should have a set of bylaws. And in your bylaws, many of them designate how the chair is selected. Some require, like the planning commission I serve on, it requires that the chair be voted upon every year in July. First meeting in July, they're supposed to select a chair for the following year. Not everybody does it that way. It just all kind of depends. And there isn't anything in there that says you can't reappoint the same person to be chair consecutively, but I think it's just a tradition that's grown up on this planning commission that I'm on, that they always select somebody different each time, which is fine, which is great. But, and some indicate that the mayor will appoint the chair. I know some planning commissions where they've had the same chair for 12 years. And you know, it just kind of depends. I don't know that there's really a right or wrong answer. I think what Ted says is good. It really, you know, a chair can make or break your commission. Because if you get a really good chair that does all the things that we've talked about, it can work really well. But if you don't, it can really bog down. Yes?
So, on a very different subject, my commissioners are going to be surprised about my question because I've been so strong on parking issues and making sure that in townhouse developments that we really thought you've got to have plenty of parking for your people, but we recently had something where we know there's going to be on-street parking for what we just passed. And so how do you line up on-street parking being fine and a perfectly okay thing for a city, but also the ordinance, if our city has an ordinance about you have to be off the road for snow removal. So how do you resolve that?
Can I add a little more color? Just a little. in Spanish Fork City, we have an ordinance, it's just a few years old, that says, "Thou shalt not have a car on a public street when there's a snowstorm and we have street plows out plowing streets." So therefore, we have become a little bit more sensitive about allowing for some leniency, with the idea that we're not necessarily requiring a lot more parking than what the code would prescribe for, let's say, a multifamily kind of development. Because we would anticipate that people are going to park on the street, and therefore maybe you don't need as much off-street parking for that. Well, and it's because, you know, it snows 3 or 4 times a year and we have snow plows out that often. But is that fair to say? Okay.
You realize you're asking me to start talking about parking. This is very interesting. But let me back up and say a couple of fundamental, but perhaps a little uncomfortable truths. One is that parking demand is not constant from one family to the next. Across a community, different people will have different demands for parking. Even if you don't have public transportation in your community. So what does that mean? That means that, let's say you have a development that has a notably less amount of parking. You know who will not choose to live there? Those that need more than that amount of parking. And so if you have a diversity of parking supply across your developments, then you're enabling a diverse population to find the spot that works for them. Which leads me to my second point. Relatively less parking saves people money. It saves rent. It does. And if we care about affordability, it is one of the tools in our toolbox. Okay, now, who likes spillover parking? Exactly nobody likes spillover parking. It's very unpopular with neighbors, and I totally get it. I hate it too. I don't like it when people park in front of my house. And so then what do? You've got to have some place where spillover can occur, but in an acceptable way. And if it's not on the street, think about whether there is option C. And it could be that you have a piece of that property that is, it's visitor parking, it's unbundled from the individual units, and you have a certain amount that's available. And maybe there has to be some enforcement mechanism, maybe you put it on the landowner. This is one of the problems, is that there's always this, if you let a developer underpark, recognize that there's benefits to underparking, then you either have a management problem, a management need, or something like that. And so it's tricky, isn't it? But I guess part of my message to you is there actually is a plus side to less parking. We often only focus on the negative of less parking. I hope that was useful.
You guys address or talk about zoning designations. Like when a city looks at a general plan, you've got this many acres in this section designated for low density housing. Then next to it, you've got this many acres designated for medium or high. And so when a development comes to us, we look at it and say, okay, where does it fit in the general plan? And then we make sure that every home in that development plan is within what's been designated as the general plan. But then I've also heard the concept of it's good to have developments with mixed housing. So you've got within an acre, now you've got a piece that's single family, larger lots, and then also within that same development, smaller lots, smaller homes. What are your thoughts when it comes to zoning designations? Is it better to have one concept of everything fits within the general plan the way it's been designated? Or do you think historically it's good to have these mixed developments with different sections?
Well, there isn't anything that prevents you from designating in your plan mixed use or mixed development. So you could designate that. In fact, we're working on a general plan update in Kaysville right now, and we've got an area that'll be designated as mixed use. so that you mix commercial and residential together in it. The proportion is not specified. It's a general plan, right? We don't nail down the really hard specifics. For a while there, it was kind of the trend to, in your general plan, to just kind of give basic concepts and not get real detailed about specific number of units and specific types of uses and so on. So it really depends on how specific you want to be in your plan and how you want to designate it.
Can I add that you can do both? Okay, so you can have a mix and stay true to your general plan. Are you talking about a single family kind of area? So here's what planners do that's a mistake often. They will confuse the minimum lot size with density. So, you know, they'll say, well, 10,000 square foot lot, that's our minimum lot size. If you're a developer and you want to maximize your unit count, and you build everything as close to the minimum as you can. And so ultimately, you end up getting a subdivision that is very uniform. You could take that same, let's say that equated to a perfect 4 units per acre. You could say to the developer, your minimum lot size is now no longer 10,000. It can vary between 7,000 and 15,000. It can vary between that. But you also have to average 4 units per acre. And so the density equates to exactly the same. But now the developer can provide a mix of lot sizes to meet the topography of the site, to vary price points, to do some interesting things with planning. You follow me?
Do you have an opinion as to which is better, a uniform subdivision?
That's worse.
Yeah.
Uniform is worse.
I think so.
As a general matter, because diversity of design is more appealing visually, and because it helps you get a more, price point tends to match socioeconomics, and you want a little bit of a diversity too. So you can do it in ways that you feel like would be acceptable to your community, right? So it doesn't have to be soup to nuts, right? It doesn't have to be estates to dense apartments. It can be whatever range you want to look for. It could all be single family within that range. But you can set it up so that your density is not a function of your minimum lot size. It's a function of just a statement of average density. Gives a developer some play.
Mm-hmm.
What is your opinion on the success rate? Not talking in the larger cities. I think in the larger cities, I probably already know the answer, but when we get down into the smaller towns and cities, when you have your retail space below and then you have your either high density or your apartments and things like that above, we've seen a lot of them go in, we've seen a lot of them with empty storefronts. What's your opinion of the overall success of that concept in these more rural areas?
Go ahead.
There's not one answer to this, but I mean, there's a basic reality, which is brick and mortar retail is in decline. Okay, so people are buying more and more online. I mean, I'm of two minds of that. Of course, I like to save money, but brick and mortar retail creates vitality in the community. But it is reality. It's a reality sandwich on a platter. So I think that if you're a community and you want a mix of uses, which is cool, I love the mixed use concept, but you've got to be really pragmatic and realistic about how much retail you can support. And there's market studies that you can do that are inexpensive, can be relatively inexpensive, how much buying power you have in the community, how much retail you currently have, right? But it's very common for communities to overestimate how much retail they can really hold and absorb. So there are techniques, so keep
What
going.
if it's not retail, what if it's service oriented? I mean, the ones that I see that succeed tend to have services.
That's exactly where I was going to go. So if you want that active feeling on the main floor, then open that up to a broader variety of uses, not just retail.
Yeah, I mean, even though we're buying more stuff online, What you're not going to get online generally is you're not going to go to a restaurant online. Yeah, you're going to order takeout online, but you're not going to go to a restaurant online. You're not going to go to a hairdresser or a barber online. There are a bunch of things like that that you just can't do online, and they still need a place to go or to be. So I think we'll see more and more of that kind of use.
Can I come at that same question just a little different direction? Because what she described, right? I mean, as planners, we go to conferences, we hear of all the benefits that come from having compact development, mixed use, walkable, all live workspace, all of those different things that in one way or another kind of tie into what then we sometimes even become big proponents of. We start to write codes that require it and different things like that. I mean, downtown, area plans and things where we try to prescribe that as part of, new development, redevelopment, those types of things. The role of using other expertise in trying to answer the question of will it work or not? Market studies, different things like that. Do you have any experience with getting that type of input in terms of trying to be able to accurately predict, if the street level floor of this 30,000 square foot building is all non-residential, what's the likelihood that the market's going to support that and that type of a thing? I haven't had a lot of luck with that, as something that might predict, again, success. Do you guys? Or are there other tools maybe out there that you'd suggest we employ to try to?
So are you saying that you've done some market studies and they haven't always been good predictors?
We haven't.
I believe you if that's what you're saying, but go ahead.
We haven't been able to locate people that we felt could give us accurate information as part of a market study.
Yeah, and market studies are often expensive.
Expensive, yeah. So part of the question as well is, are there other things, anything that?
I like the idea of getting retail developers from the area that don't have a stake in that zone change and bringing them together and do a focus group and let their advice help you. They're making their living off of getting this right. And so that's a good way to do it on the cheap,
Go to a broker and say, how would you like the opportunity to market this space? What's the likelihood that you could land tenants, maybe, is the thought that comes to mind, based on what you just said, something like that.
This is a really interesting time as we hopefully come out of the pandemic. There's so many things in flux. And one little thing I wanted to throw out is that, a lot of communities focus on retail for economic development, for the health of their city revenue. Well, 50% of that is allocated based on the point of sale, where people spend their dollar. If you're buying on Amazon, your bedroom is your point of sale. And so now you should start increasingly thinking about how do we attract and retain those that choose to telework, and that should be part of your calculus increasingly.
We're in Elbridge. We're kind of a unique situation that we have essentially not just retail. We have no commercial. So as we look ahead to a state when we're no longer growing and growth isn't like the predominant element here, what kind of resources would we have as far as going for the? One of the weaknesses our community has is not enough parks, not enough trails or recreational things, and aside from whatever the developer brings with, what they bring in, we're limited. Are there places or resources that we can go to for grants and other things to kind of compensate for what we lack on the commercial side of things?
It's a tough question. I do have an idea to throw out, but do you want to take the hard ones?
You know, I mean, one of the things you may be getting some resource from now and should be getting more is, as Ted already mentioned, the point of sale for online sales. You know, you probably have a lot of people in your community that are buying online, so you should be getting some resource off of that. I know that there's been discussion in the legislature this year to relook the formula for distribution of sales tax. Whether that'll happen and what the form is it'll take, I don't know, we'll see, but that may be something to keep your eye on.
And I'm gonna also ask some of the other planners in the room, have you been tracking what Provo did with their transportation impact, their transportation utility fee? It's not an impact fee, it's a different.
Yeah.
What about
It's
those?
a
kinds of
utility
tools?
fee.
Well, it's being litigated right now. Pleasant Grove
Okay.
City
Yeah.
did a utility fee, and there was an organization that had to sue us for it. They became the poster child, Pleasant Grove City, even though a lot of cities are doing it, Pleasant Grove became the poster child for challenging whether or not these transportation utility fees are actually legal.
Okay.
So it's a tool that cities have kind of gotten away with using, but it's now trying to be figured out, and obviously it's been delayed because of the pandemic. So we're all looking to Pleasant Grove City and how that lawsuit pans out so we can understand it better.
And at a high level, this is a community experimenting with different ways of raising revenue. And so it may have some implications for communities that are being creative about it. This is a time where there's a lot of tinkering around with city revenue.
I want to guess that maybe not many people will disagree that here in the south part of Utah County, we are in, probably one of the parts of the country that's as strongly against property taxes, for lots of different reasons as maybe anywhere. But for me, that's the answer. Given the tools that communities have been given by the legislature relative to how we fund the basic services that are offered and how we fund capital projects and all those types of things. I think Pleasant Grove and Provo and other cities that have gone, maybe the more creative route, ultimately that's because there's such a strong aversion to property tax, even though, not that I am here to, propose that we consider raising property taxes, but that's a very stable,
Tweet out what it is.
it's a very stable, consistent source of revenue, whereas, for example, sales tax isn't.
That's being recorded.
I phrase that to where I can answer for that tomorrow, so.
Oh yeah, there's the little things that, like the cable recording.
Right.
Obviously, you're appointed and not elected.
So my response to that would be, you're going to have to really look at yourself and critically decide what you want your community to be. If you want your community to not have any of those higher impact uses like commercials, then maybe that's an option you have to look at in order to sustain your community. Or maybe you can start to be creative and flexible with home occupations and allowing for a level of point of sales with home occupations to a certain extent. There might be some things that you can play with to kind of tip the scale a little bit more to things that will help support your financial side of the thing. So it's really, that's the essence of planning commissioners, and the general plan is really what is your identity, and then once you decide what the identity is, you have to make policy decisions to conform to that identity.
Yeah, we definitely found the identity, and there's not really anything we can do to change it if we want to. But it's just, what do we do with it, and how do we make it work, and what's sustainable?
Are there grants or avenues to get grants for small cities?
There are some.
For specific purposes though, not
Yeah.
just for bolstering the city budgets, for specific use. Charities.
Right. But even still, a lot of our grants are matching grants as well, so you have to come up with half the money or portion of the money.
Aren't our boards similar to with their impact fees?
So,
So that's where we get a little bit.
You have to be careful because impact fees have to be justifiable. survivals.
Yeah, them.
You just can't arbitrarily raise impact fees because.
So short term, we have growth that's helping with that, and that's true, but we have deficiencies. So we have to fix the deficiency too, and that's.
There's hiking in shouldn't be that much
In any growing community that values that question, I think, and the importance of what land use decisions you make today and how they're going to impact the future. And you reused the word that I think spot on, particularly when it comes to financing municipal operations, sustainability. I don't want to paint a dire picture, but it's property tax or it's a balance of land uses. To a large degree, just given the tools that we have, your impact fees, different things like that. That's one-time revenue, it's capital projects, it's not ongoing revenue.
There's a simple graphic that I saw, but I think it paints a realistic picture. There's a triangle of, you could either have higher density, which lowers your cost per unit, or you could have lower services, which lowers your expenditure, or you could have higher taxes, which raises your revenue. You got to pick one of those three or some balance. And I think that's a tricky thing for people to explore and understand. But I think there's a basic truth to that. And yeah, so we can talk more about that if you feel like it. But these are the kinds of things that I think elected officials start to learn over time. And I think residents often come in the door and they don't totally understand that package.
I'd like to revisit the first topic we had, the connectivity of streets and roads. It seems like we have had a penchant for a while now to just plop down the developments and say, let's build a road around, or let's build a wall around it. And so as we have looked at other developments that come in, there's sometimes a resistance to having any kind of, connection with these other guys, if you will. And what I'm asking is this a product of development? Are developers coming in and liking to have something that's unique to them? Or is it us as planners who are kind of forcing them that way to become their own little community rather than a part of the whole? A mile and a half away from here, you can be in a place that you just can't get to there from here.
I'm not sure. I think it, what do you think? What do you all think?
There were some of the pictures that show some pretty wild things, and where they were, I'm not sure. But spirals and different things, and we have a tendency to have roads and we talk about cul-de-sacs that are quite lengthy and things like that. I like to go around the communities with my wife and see what's going on in other communities. And sometimes my wife gets really upset with me because we have to come out exactly the same way we went in.
Right.
And I think it's happening in most of the communities, at least in south end of the county, and quite a bit in the north end of our county. And so I'm not exactly sure what has brought us to that. And I think the discussion is absolutely right. Once it's in, it's almost impossible to change that and alleviate that because homes are built. Now you're going to have to go in and spend a lot of money to acquire land or homes that are there and stuff like that. So how do we solve that? And is it something that we even want to solve? Is this a thing that the developers are do they want to be known as the one that comes up with the neatest idea and the latest and greatest plan? Or are we kind of responsible for that by saying, let's build a wall here, let's make sure they're all, sturdy and here for the millennium?
I love this question. Go ahead.
So, John, for me to try to answer that, I think in Spanish Fork, the developers we work with, they are looking for the path of least resistance, the easiest way to put a product out on the market and to generate cash flow and all those types of things. So I think it 100% is the result of what we as a community have asked for, what we've mandated, et cetera. At least the majority of the time, that's the case.
How do we tilt? If we're gonna have more
Change what we asked for.
stuff, how do we tilt that?
Well, I think it depends on what use is next to it, right, for the wall. Sometimes the wall makes sense if you've got some retail use or a gas station next to a house.
Absolutely.
Quick, quick, Carla.
Or a beautiful, quick, quick car wash. Hopefully it's green and yellow, and you haven't manipulated the colors. That governments love to do. Anyway, I think it depends on what uses are next to each other.
Yeah, I think it might be, and I don't know, this is just a theory, but to something Heather said earlier is it might be that you collectively as a city, whether it be planning commission, city council, staff, you might have a policy that you guys are just meeting the code because you have a code that says you need to put a wall up. But it might be you did that because there was a meeting, and usually a lot of the amendments in your code are because of one specific issue, one specific project. And it might be that code was created because you had a mob of residents show up and say, we do not want to have the impacts of this, put up a wall, separate it, buffer us from that, and it still might be in your code. So you may not even know it, but you might have a code requirement or code requirements that lead to having those types of barriers and buffers.
Sometimes, remember when I talked about a wall between a subdivision and a street being a planning failure? You could argue that the wall between the retail and residential is also a planning failure. It may be this is a sign that you need a transitional use. You need a use that fits better next to retail, that enables you to have better connectivity. And it becomes a little bit just the way we think about what the community that you're going to create long-term is going to be. There's not one answer. All right, so you're thinking of some really weighty questions, but on the one hand, you as the commission, the planners, the city council, for heaven's sakes, think about the long term. Whatever you think is the right thing, stretch it out 4 to 10 decades and think, is this the right thing long term? That retail is going to go away. The wall will not. Just think about that. The retail will change. It will be something different. The wall may never go away. Maybe not.
I think it's actually the residents. I chose a house in a cul-de-sac. Most people don't want to be on a through street. It's actually one of the biggest complaints, besides water and stuff like that we get in this new community that's being put in our community, is that, that's going to dump out on my road and it's already a busy road. Yeah. And so I think having all those cute little cul-de-sacs and fences is what actually people want. It feels safer, your kids are safer. Nobody comes down your street unless they're meant to be there or they're lost. And there's a certain aspect of that that's nice. And so you have a community that has 16 cul-de-sacs instead of 4 through roads is probably going to sell better to all the people with kids than the 4 through roads.
There's not one size fits all, you're right. And I think that your basic point is also right. And what I would suggest is to explore, are there other ways that still feel neighborly, that still feel like they would cut down on the cut-through traffic, but provide some of the other benefits of connectivity? Can you have it both ways? And kick the tires on, explore, ask the developer to give you option B. Just play it out a little bit.
Sorry, I'm talking a lot tonight. I kind of want to make a bold statement. So, planning commissioners are appointed officials. And sometimes planning commissioners sometimes get in the role and feel like they have constituents or they are representative of the community. I think understanding that is really important as your role as planning commissioner. But I would say use that to your advantage. you're look at these things objectively, and I guess what I was alluding to earlier with you is stand your ground and don't give in to the pressure of the public, because those are always going to be very emotional, you know, in a lot of cases, bad planning types of feelings of put up the wall, put up the barrier, you know, don't bring traffic down our street, get rid of connectivity, those types of things. So I think remembering your role and remember, use that to your advantage, that you aren't a representative of them, they aren't your constituents, but stand up and really be a proponent for good planning principles and good things that will make your community a good place to live long term.
From your own experience, when is an appropriate time to table something as to vote on it emotionally? A lot of times developer approaches and you kind of, and we've experienced this where we feel like there's a timeline, where they have a timeline. How do you determine or make that decision as to when it's okay to table something, as to when maybe we need to listen to the timeline?
Can I jump in? I'm of the opinion that you get your business done and you get the business done of the people who want it. If you're ready to make a decision, do it. Vote on it. I would only recommend tabling it if there's really things that aren't clear yet. You don't know whether, you know, something still needs to be looked into. You're unsure. You know, people still really haven't formulated their thoughts about it. And then at that point, it might pay to table it and get a little more information, spend a little more time. But otherwise, vote on it and get it done.
So what if you're in a discussion where a lot of public show up, they're very heated on something, and the commission might be emotional at the time? Is it better to table it, to wait until the emotion's out of the room, or do you still go ahead and move forward on it?
Yeah, I think sometimes it pays to let things cool off. And you really just got to read the situation and decide whether that would be a better thing to do.
And one thing you can do is take a recess too.
Yeah.
And still vote on it that night, but
yep.
I don't think there's one answer to this. It's a great question.
Yeah.
Can I follow that up? I don't think it's our responsibility as planning commissioners to be on the developer's timeline. If they have a timeline, too bad. That's something that they're trying to force or impose on you guys with us. I've said before, it's not up to us to make sure that they can make money. If they can't make a pencil, it's not our problem. If they have to put another water line in that's more expensive, it's not our problem. If they have to put a connecting road in, not our problem. Meet the code and meet what's best for the community, and if it takes you 3 more times to the planning commission, who cares? It's not our role, I don't believe, to help them make money or help them be more timely to make their money. It's not our role. Our role is to look at it objectively, what's best for the community, are they meeting the code, and what we feel like is the best way to go, not their timeline.
Yeah, and I would agree. If you feel like that you don't have the answers that you need, take the time.
I don't necessarily want to get the last word, but in the spirit of respecting everybody's time,
well, somebody has to.
John raised a point that, for me, the issue's irrelevant. But to get your thoughts on how a planning commissioner maybe should go about trying to influence change if they feel like there's something that needs to be changed. And we've got a diverse group of communities here. Some of them have planning staff, for example, some of them don't. But in terms of planning commissioners feeling appropriately empowered to try to have the opportunity at least to suggest changes and to go through some kind of an appropriate process that way. Any thoughts about how maybe you'd start on that path?
Well, for starters, if it relates to your general plan, right? And it's about implementing your general plan, but perhaps it's not on the radar yet, I think you're empowered to ask for that to get in the queue. And then, you know, it's a legislative change, typically if it's a zone change. It's going to go to the council anyway. But you can ask for something to be considered and explored, and you know, the council may disagree with you, but I think if it's in the general plan, you're empowered, that's one. And then also Will had ideas.
You know, your job as a planning commissioner and the planning commission overall is to advise the council.
Yeah.
And so if you see things that you think need to be addressed, let's say it's just you just see something, I'd start off by talking to your fellow planning commissioners and say, hey, you know, what about this? This maybe needs to be looked at, and if you get enough commissioners that agree with you, then I think you've got the ability to, you know, instruct the staff to start doing some work on this and have a discussion at your planning commission meeting. And then you make a recommendation to the council to do something different. Now, I have heard different reactions from councils. I've heard some that appreciate that. I've heard others say, we didn't ask you to look at that. We don't want you to look at that. What the heck are you doing? And in that case, you know, you've got a little bit of a political situation on your hands. But you certainly, I think, under state code, you certainly have the ability to do that.
How about one more round?